Good evening, everyone. Welcome you all to Oncology Classroom. As you all know, this month we are discussing different topics on pediatric oncology. And last week we have discussed the initial part of the pediatric germ cell tumor. This week we are going to have the remaining part of pediatric germ cell tumor, which will be taken by Dr. Renu Madan. Dr. Renu Madan is an alumnus of prestigious All India Institute of Medical Sciences, New Delhi, and currently working as Associate Professor in the Department of Radiation Oncology at PGIMER, Chandigarh. Thank you, Dr. Renu, for being with us. May I now request you to please take over the session and start your lecture. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. So it's the second class of pediatric germ cell tumor. So last time we discussed intracranial and testicular germ cell tumors, and today I'll try to discuss ovarian and extragonadal germ cell tumor, extragonadal, extracranial germ cell tumors. So I'll cover the topic under these headings: epidemiology, then diagnostic evaluation, treatment guidelines, then about ovarian teratoma, dysgerminoma, non-dysgerminomatous tumor, then sacrococcygeal teratoma, then other extragonadal, extracranial germ cell tumor, and finally a few slides about fertility sparing. So there will be repetition of few slides for those who did not attend the last class. So this is distribution of germ cell tumor. So germ cell tumors are not only seen in gonadal site but extragonadal sites also. So among extragonadal site, intracranial is the commonest site, seen in approximately 20% of the cases, and this is followed by sacrococcygeal site. It constitutes approximately 20% of the germ cell tumor in pediatric population. So these tumors are seen in midline, and the sites vary with the age. Now coming to classification of malignant germ cell tumor. So germ cell tumors, they arise from primordial germ cell tumors, from primordial germ cell, and it is broadly divided into seminomatous or non-seminomatous. Seminomatous is the counterpart of dysgerminoma in ovary and germinoma in intracranial site. So one is seminomatous or dysgerminomatous, and seminomatous or dysgerminomatous, and other is non-dysgerminomatous, which is again classified into 5-6 categories, which are embryonal carcinoma, yolk sac tumor, teratoma, choriocarcinoma, and mixed germ cell tumor. So the malignant potential of teratoma varies with age. It is generally benign in young children and malignant in older children. So this is how extragonadal germ cell tumors develop. So earlier it was thought that germ cell tumor, they arise from mature gonadal germ cell but this is not the case. There are actually two theories for development of extragonadal germ cell. One is germ cell theory and one is embryonic cell theory. This is the normal development. Totipotent primordial germ cell, when it has normal differentiation, it will develop into normal testis or ovary. But in case of the abnormal differentiation, it will develop into the germ cell tumors. So what are these two theories? According to this germ cell theory, this primordial germ cell, this aberrantly migrate to the other extragonadal sites and it undergo malignant transformation. And this embryonic cell theory says that this cell escapes normal development, and then this leads to development of extragonadal germ cell tumors. So primordial germ cell is actually an undifferentiated stem cells which later develops into spermatozoa or oocyte. So if there is no tissue differentiation in primordial germ cell, then it will lead to development of seminoma, and if there are various kinds of differentiation, it will lead to other germ cell tumor, like if there is embryonal differentiation, embryonal carcinoma or teratoma. If there is extraembryonal differentiation, yolk sac tumor or choriocarcinoma, and then there can be the combined differentiation. So then, based on the histology, again these tumors are classified into type 1 and type 2. So these type 1 tumor, teratoma and yolk sac tumor, these are more common in children less than 4 years of age, and other tumors like embryonal carcinoma, seminoma or dysgerminoma, choriocarcinoma, and sometimes teratoma, these are classified as type 2 tumor, type 2 germ cell tumor, more common in age more than 4 years. Now coming to pediatric germ cell tumor, these are actually malignant cancer of germline cell in patients less than 18 years of age. These are rare tumor. These can present since birth, or they can develop later in the childhood or in the adolescent period. In children less than 18 years of age, these malignancies constitute approximately 4% of all malignancies. And as the incidence of these malignancies increases with the age, these malignancies, germ cell tumor, constitute 15% of all malignancy in adolescent age group. So overall, the incidence in children is approximately 3 per 100,000 girls per year. So if we look at the age-adjusted annual incidence, it is 0.1 per 100,000 girls in the age less than 9 years, and close to 1 in the age group of 10 to 19 years. But if we look at in women more than 20 years, then the incidence is quite high, which reaches up to 11 cases per 100,000 per year. So these tumors have bimodal distribution, one peak, small peak in infant, and the larger peak is seen in adult. Although the germ cell tumor incidence is higher in older patients, the older children, the incidence of malignancy is higher in younger children. So coming to ovarian tumors, so ovarian it is a complex structure and it can lead to development of various tumor of epithelial germ cell or sex-fold stromal tumor origin. So these are the various causes of ovarian mass in children, can be divided into benign or malignant. So among benign causes, physiological or ovarian cysts are the common, which constitute 45% of the adnexal mass, most common in pubertal or post-pubertal age group. Then follicular cyst, endometrioma, abscess, ectopic pregnancy, or reproductive tract abnormalities, or there can be benign tumors. Among malignant ovarian tumor, which are rare in children and constitute only 1 to 2% of all tumors. So most of the malignant ovarian tumor in children are germ cell tumor, and Sertoli-Leydig cell tumor and other epithelial cell tumor are even rare before the menarche. So like in any other germ cell tumor, they arise from primordial germ cell tumor. Ovarian germ cell tumor constitute of approximately 28 to 30% of all germ cell tumor in pediatric age group, and approximately 70% of ovarian cancer in children are germ cell tumor. So this is the WHO classification for children less than 15 years of age. Teratoma is the most common, approximately 40%, followed by dysgerminoma in 25% and yolk sac tumor in 15%. Then embryonal carcinoma, choriocarcinoma, mixed tumor or gonadoblastoma are seen rarely in children. So the histology of ovarian germ cell tumor also varies with respect to the age group. This is in adult and children. In adult, as you know, ovarian epithelial tumors are most common, close to 65%, while in children, germ cell tumor are common, close to 70%. Coming to the symptoms of ovarian germ cell tumor, it is often asymptomatic until it reaches a size which can compress neighboring structures. So based on the compression of these structures, patient may have abdominal pain. Approximately 70-80% patients will complain of pain abdomen. Then lower abdominal mass is common. Then due to secretion of tumor markers like HCG, precocious puberty is also common. Less frequently, patient may have constipation or primary or secondary amenorrhea or vaginal bleeding. And approximately 10% patient will present as acute abdomen due to torsion, infarction, or spontaneous rupture of the mass. So now how we'll diagnose these tumors? So generally ultrasound is the first investigation which is done, which shows a solid cystic lesion. This is generally followed by abdominal CT scan or MRI for the primary and metastasis. Metastasis to liver, retroperitoneal lymph nodes, or peritoneal metastasis. Then chest X-ray has to be done routinely, and if there is any abnormality on chest X-ray, CT chest has to be done. So based on the imaging, cystic components are more frequent in benign forms, but imaging is not only the criteria for diagnosis germ cell tumors, because many times benign and malignant germ cell tumor may show similar imaging features. So histology subtype is often necessary. The next is tumor markers. Germ cell tumor, they do secrete tumor markers, and there are two main classes of tumor markers: oncofetal substances and cellular enzymes. Among oncofetal substances, alpha-fetoprotein and HCG, and in cellular enzyme, LDH. So they have diagnostic and prognostic importance. How they will prognosticate? Because raised tumor markers after surgery will indicate residual disease. Level of marker elevation is proportional to the tumor burden. Then they can give us idea about the histology, like AFP. If it is markedly elevated, it will tell us that yolk sac component is there. Likewise, if HCG is high, choriocarcinoma is to be suspected. Then decline in the level will indicate response to the tumor, response to the treatment, and during follow-up, if the markers are still high, they indicate relapse of the disease. So alpha-fetoprotein is the most commonly elevated marker seen in 90% of the patients with germ cell tumor, followed by beta HCG. LDH can be elevated, but it is non-specific to histology. Most of the germinoma will have normal alpha-fetoprotein level. So these are the two important tumor markers, HCG and AFP. HCG, which has a half-life of 24 to 36 hours, and it is elevated mostly in embryonal cell carcinoma, choriocarcinoma, mixed germ cell tumor, and sometimes in dysgerminoma. So level, when we start chemo, the level of HCG should reduce by more than 90% after every chemo. And if there is less than 90% response, that means there is a suboptimal response to the chemotherapy. So half-life of AFP is 5 to 7 days, and it is elevated in yolk sac tumor, embryonal cell carcinoma, mixed germ cell tumor, and sometimes in immature teratoma, or never raised in pure choriocarcinoma or dysgerminoma. So the decline in AFP is less as compared to the HCG. So now the question is when to repeat tumor markers when patient is on chemotherapy. Actually, it takes approximately 4 to 5 half-lives to become these markers normal. So it should be repeated after 4 half-life of these tumor markers. Like if you want to check AFP while patient is on chemotherapy, then it should be repeated after 21 days, while HCG can be repeated earlier, even after 5 to 6 days of chemotherapy. Coming to the prognostic factors, age, stage, primary site of the disease, decline in tumor markers while on chemotherapy, then histology, dysgerminomatous versus non-dysgerminomatous, and presence of gonadal dysgenesis, which indicates worse outcome. Then coming to staging of these tumors, there are 2 staging systems available. based on the surgical findings. One is from COG and other is FIGO, which is same as in epithelial ovarian cancer. So I'll briefly discuss the staging system. This COG staging has divided ovarian germ cell into 4 stages: stage 1, 2, 3, 3x or 4. One stage is when tumor is completely removed without violation of tumor capsule, and rest everything is negative. No capsular penetration, no peritoneal cytology. Peritoneal cytology is negative, no peritoneal deposits, no lymph nodes. And in stage 2, tumor is completely removed, but there will be some violation of the capsule. In stage 3, if there is a positive peritoneal cytology, or if lymph nodes are positive, or if there are peritoneal implants, this will come in stage 3. In stage 3x, otherwise it will be like stage 1 or stage 2. But if there is a failure in adequate surgical staging, like failure to collect peritoneal cytology or failure to biopsy the abnormal area, this will come under stage 3x. And stage 4 is metastatic disease, metastasis to liver parenchyma. But surface implant on liver will come under stage 3, or metastasis outside the peritoneal cavity or other viscera. Coming to the FIGO staging, generally it is used for adult germ cell tumor, but at some pediatric centers, this FIGO staging is also being used. 4 stages have been divided. Stage 1 is when tumor confined to ovary, again divided into 1A, 1B and 1C. So 1A is when tumor is in one ovary only with intact capsule. 1B is tumor involves both ovaries, but the capsule is intact. 1C is tumor may involve one ovary or both ovaries, but either there will be capsule ruptured, or there will be surgical spill, or there will be malignant cells in ascites or peritoneal washing. Stage 2 is when there is involvement of 1 or 2 ovaries, but with pelvic extension. Again divided into 2A and 2B. 2A is when there is extension to uterus or fallopian tubes, and 2B is when there is involvement of other pelvic structures like bladder and bowel. Now, stage 3 is when tumor involves 1 or both ovaries or primary peritoneal cancer, but there will be cytologically or histologically confirmed disease to peritoneum outside pelvis. Stage 2 was within pelvis. Stage 3 is outside pelvis disease or metastasis to retroperitoneal lymph node. So stage 3-1A is when there are grossly enlarged retroperitoneal lymph nodes. Stage 3A2 is when there are microscopic disease, microscopic pelvic involvement, with or without retroperitoneal lymph node involvement. And stage 3B is when there are gross peritoneal mets, can be less than 2 centimeter, or if they are more than 2 centimeter, this will come in stage 3C. And stage 4 is distant metastasis. So this is the risk grouping, COG risk grouping, also known as MAGIC risk grouping. So as we know, testicular germ cell tumor are the most common germ cell tumor in pediatric age group, and otherwise also testicular germ cell tumor are most common. So whatever data we have about the prognosis and about the treatment, this has been extrapolated from testicular germ cell tumor. So there is no definitive treatment guidelines or risk grouping for other tumors, other like ovary or extragonadal tumors or extracranial tumors. So to overcome this and to form standard guidelines, COG and Cancer and Leukemia Group has developed these guidelines. These guidelines were made by using data of approximately 1100 patients from 25 trials. So based on that, patients are divided into
Renu?
Anji sir.
There are occasional disturbance in audio. It's not being clear sometimes.
Okay.
थोड़ा सा माइक्रोफोन की तरफ आ जाओगे क्या? ऐसे लगेगा ना थोड़ा दूर से आ रहा है आवाज.
अभी आ रहा है मेरे को?
ये this is okay.
मुझे ये बहुत ही पास में करना पड़ रहा है. Is it okay?
This is okay.
Okay. So I'm not able to see the screen properly इसमें.
Oh.
But if I'll manage. Okay.
Okay.
So अभी it's fine.
This is fine.
Okay. So this has been divided into low risk, standard risk 1, standard risk 2, and poor risk. Basically, low risk tumor are those who can be managed with only surgery followed by observation, but this is only for the testicular tumor. So studies are going on to see that if this observation policy after surgery is applicable to other than testis, other sites other than testis like ovary and extragonadal. In standard risk or intermediate risk, it has been seen that chemotherapy leads to cure in approximately 80 to 90% of these patients. So they are doing studies to see if we can reduce the number of cycles of chemotherapy or the dose of chemotherapy to reduce the side effects of the treatment, because otherwise outcome in this group is good. And poor risk is that which generally do not respond to the standard chemotherapy, and so there are studies on high dose chemotherapy or other extensive chemotherapy to see if there is any improvement of adding other drugs in this age, in this risk group. So coming to the treatment options in germ cell tumor. So as in all pediatric cancer, the aim should be long-term survival and to minimize treatment-related long-term sequelae. So these are few policies which have to be taken while treating extracranial germ cell tumor. So either we do only surgical resection followed by observation or chemotherapy. And if there are bilateral tumor in ovarian cancer, we should attempt preservation of ovary on at least on the least involved site. We should try to maintain hormonal and reproductive function as much as possible. Extensive intraoperative staging procedure, which are generally recommended in adults, are not recommended in children. Only limited staging is sufficient, but if there is any doubt on limited staging, we should go for extensive intraoperative staging. If the tumor is unresectable, it is wise to go for tumor biopsy and neoadjuvant chemotherapy followed by definitive tumor resection. Unlike adult, where we try to do maximum tumor bulking before neoadjuvant chemotherapy, there is no definitive role of maximum tumor debulking before neoadjuvant therapy in children. So coming to the principle of surgery. So limited intraoperative staging should be done, and oophorectomy alone or salpingo-oophorectomy should be done. But sometimes even excision of the tumor is recommended for benign tumor. Fallopian tube, if it is adherent, it should be removed. Also, there is a lymphatic channel between tube and ovary, so ideally it should be removed. But if the tumor is very small and it is away from the fallopian tube, it can be preserved, and only oophorectomy can be done for these patients. Extensive surgery like total abdominal hysterectomy and bilateral salpingo-oophorectomy, which is generally done in adult patient, is not the standard in pediatric patient, and it should be done only when fertility sparing surgery is not possible. So as discussed, primary excision should be done only when the operating surgeon thinks that the tumor can be removed completely. Otherwise, neoadjuvant chemotherapy has to be given. Laparoscopic surgery should be avoided in all germ cell tumor because it can lead to rupture of the capsule, which will upstage the disease. The peritoneal fluid for cytology should be collected or washing if no fluid is present. Examination should be done for omentum, peritoneal surface, liver, ilio-aortic lymph node, and biopsy of any abnormal area should be done whenever it is suspected. Omentectomy and other lymphadenectomy, which is generally recommended in adult patients, is not recommended in children. So this is the percentage of lymph node involvement according to the histology. In dysgerminoma, 20 to 30% patient will have a positive lymph node. In mixed germ cell tumor, 5 to 15%, and in malignant teratoma, close to 5% patient may have enlarged lymph node. So coming to the chemotherapy, so these tumors are chemosensitive. So before chemotherapy, the outcome was really poor with 5-year survival of approximately 20 to 30%. And with the advent of chemotherapy, earlier VAC chemo was used, but it was also associated with poor survival, with the overall survival range of close to 70%. But later on, with the development of cisplatin containing regimen, survival has improved from 70% to closely to approximately 90%. So currently, bleomycin, etoposide, and cisplatin or carboplatin are the most common regimen which are used for treatment of germ cell tumor. Carboplatin has also been used, which is less toxic. So, in prepubertal age, PEP chemotherapy is used, and in postpubertal, BEP chemotherapy is used. This is the difference between adult BEP and pediatric BEP chemo. In adult BEP, we all know bleomycin is given 30 unit per meter square on day 1, 8, 15. Etoposide 100 milligram per meter square for 5 days, and cisplatin 20 milligram per meter square for 5 days. For pediatric chemotherapy regimen, PEB, which is also given every 21 days, etoposide and cisplatin regimen remains the same, but dose of bleomycin is less. It is 15 units per meter square, and that too it is given only on day 1, unlike day 1, 8, and 15 in adults. And if we replace cisplatin with carboplatin, then the dose schedule is a little different. This JEB chemotherapy is given every 3 to 4 weekly. Bleomycin dose is 15 units per meter square. It is given on day 3. This JEB chemotherapy regimen is for 3 days. So bleomycin is given on day 3. Etoposide, a little higher dose is given, 120 milligram per meter square for 3 days, and carboplatin dose is 600 milligram per meter square or AUC5 day 2. Coming to teratoma, sir, I am audible now. Is it okay?
Yeah, ma'am, you're audible.
Yeah, this is almost okay. Yes, with operational problems. It's okay. Please carry on.
Okay. So next is teratoma. Teratoma is a tumor which is comprised of ectodermal, endodermal, and mesodermal tissue. It can be mature or immature. Mature teratoma is usually benign, and mature cystic teratoma is also known as dermoid cyst. So generally, these tumors are mature teratoma are well defined, and they have larger cystic component as compared to the malignant. It does not generally show elevated C or beta activity. So many times teratoma, this has a tendency for spontaneous regression. So if the tumor is present since birth, we can wait for some time until it regresses spontaneously. But therapeutic approach like surgery should be considered if the patient is symptomatic or if the tumor size is more than 5 centimeters. So for both benign and immature teratoma, complete removal of the tumor is the only effective treatment, because it has been seen that if the tumor is not completely removed, then the recurrence rates are higher. So generally, ipsilateral ovary should be removed, but in selected cases with small unilateral tumor, ovary sparing procedure like enucleation of the lesion can be performed. Other benefit of performing surgery for teratoma is to make a definitive diagnosis, because although histology and tumor markers are different in mature teratoma as compared to the malignant form, but it is only histology which can give us the definitive diagnosis. And the second is, if it is untreated or if it is not removed, then it can further lead to torsion, rupture, or it can develop into the malignant tumors. So most of the time, mature teratoma is benign, but malignant transformation occurs in 0.2 to 2% of the patients. So it is mostly benign in pediatric patients. These are the risk factors for development of teratoma: more than 45 years age, or tumor diameter more than 10 centimeter, or if there is rapid growth. And then there are some imaging findings which can suggest that teratoma can develop into malignant teratoma later on in the life. So as we know, it is composed of ectoderm, endoderm, and mesoderm. So any of the component may undergo malignant degeneration, but squamous cell carcinoma is the commonest malignancy which arises from mature teratoma. And other malignant forms are basal cell carcinoma, melanoma, or sarcoma, thyroid carcinoma. So the treatment of malignant germ cell tumor is same as in other histologies. So coming to the immature teratoma, so this is less than 1% of ovarian teratoma, and it is the only germ cell tumor which is histologically grade from grade 1 to grade 3, well differentiated to poorly differentiated. And in immature teratoma, grade and presence of yolk sac tumor foci indicates that tumor is quite aggressive. So coming to the treatment of immature teratoma, generally surgery is sufficient for all the patients for all the stages. So stage 1, we have evidence that surgery followed by observation is sufficient for treatment of immature teratoma, but there are no definitive data for treatment of stage 2 to stage 4. Many people have tried surgery followed by observation, and many have given chemotherapy based on the other histologies. So there are some studies which have shown that chemotherapy, if we give chemotherapy in immature teratoma, it is not going to improve survival, or it is not going to decrease the relapse rate. This was a pooled analysis of 9 trial, so which suggests that although recurrence rate was higher in grade 3 immature teratoma, if chemotherapy was given to them, it did not reduce the risk of relapse. And other children oncology group study says immature teratoma do not respond to chemotherapy. So till now we do not know whether to keep these patients on follow-up or whether to give chemotherapy to these patients. Then few lines about this monodermal highly specialized teratoma, which is generally not seen in children. It is a rare type of teratoma, and it consists of predominantly mature one histological cell type. So among these, most common is Tumor ovari, which is composed of mature thyroid tissue, and other is carcinoid, which is well differentiated neuroendocrine neoplasm. So surgery is the mainstay of the treatment for both of them. The role of adjuvant treatment is not clear, although radioactive iodine has been tried in struma ovari, and role of chemotherapy is not clear in ovarian carcinoma. Now next is dysgerminoma, which is counterpart of seminoma, and it is highly sensitive to chemotherapy and radiotherapy as compared to non-dysgerminomatous tumor. It has excellent survival, mostly seen in adolescent or young adult patient, 50 to 30 years of age, and as compared to non-germinomatous germ cell tumor, it is bilateral in around 10 to 15% of the patient. So most of germinoma, they are localized to the ovary at the time of diagnosis, as compared to the other malignant germ cell tumor, which are metastatic or in locally advanced stage at the time of diagnosis. So like in every other germ cell tumor, complete resection is the goal, and in children, fertility sparing surgery should be done every time whenever possible, irrespective of the histology, which consists of unilateral salpingo-oophorectomy, and extensive surgery like total abdominal hysterectomy and BSO should be done only when this is not possible, or when the disease is extensive and it is not possible to spare the other ovary, tube, and uterus. So in germinomas, there are no guidelines are same for pre-pubertal and post-pubertal patients. And for stage 1 tumor, both age group patient, pre and post-pubertal patients, they should be kept on observation after surgery. So this stage 1 is COG stage 1 and FIGO stage 1A and 1B. Although if we keep these patients on observation, approximately 20% patients will have follow-up on recurrence, but this can be easily salvaged with chemotherapy, as these tumors are highly sensitive to chemotherapy. So if the surgery is incomplete, or if stage is stage 1C, tumor spill or tumor rupture, then adjuvant chemotherapy or radiotherapy can be given to these patients. This is based on the guidelines from adult ovarian germ cell tumor, where chemotherapy is given for stage 1C germinoma, although we do not have specific data for children. For stage 2 to stage 4, all patients should receive adjuvant treatment in the form of chemotherapy or radiotherapy. Radiotherapy is generally not preferred because the risk of side effect on growth, risk on fertility, and risk of radiation-induced second malignancy. It was used extensively in the past, but now it is used only when there is a contraindication to chemotherapy. So optimum number of chemotherapy cycles in stage 2 to stage 4 dysgerminoma is not well established, but based on the guidelines in adult patients, 3 to 4 cycles of chemotherapy is generally given for these patients. So chemotherapy is same, PEB in pediatric and PEP in adult patients. So should we give cisplatin, or we can replace it with carboplatin? So there are few meta-analysis and few retrospective studies which have shown that carboplatin is equally effective in these patients without and with reduced risk of toxicity. But cisplatin is the standard of care till now, and there is an ongoing trial which is comparing cisplatin with carboplatin. So till now, cisplatin is the standard of care. For stage 1 non-germinomatous germ cell tumor in pre-pubertal patient, surgery will remain the same, and it would be followed by observation. So this was a COG trial which showed that although after observation there was a high risk of relapse, approximately 50%, this was easily salvaged with chemotherapy with a 4-year overall survival rate of 96%. So surgery followed by observation in stage 1 non-germinomatous germ cell tumor in the pre-pubertal age group. For post-pubertal age group, because the prognosis is not as good as in pre-pubertal age group, so generally surgery is followed by chemo. So again, there is a doubt whether to give chemotherapy or whether we can keep these patients on follow-up. There are many studies, which only retrospective studies, which have shown that if these patients are kept on follow-up after surgery, outcome is excellent, and whenever a relapse happens, it can be salvaged with chemotherapy. But again, this issue is being undertaken in this trial, which is investigating the role of observation versus chemotherapy in these patients. For stage 2 to 4 non-dysgerminomatous patient, treatment will remain the same for pre and post pubertal age group. Surgery followed by chemotherapy. 4 to 6 cycles of chemotherapy is generally given. 6 cycles are given in stage 4 patients, otherwise 4 cycles. So if sometimes in stage 4 disease, if resection is not possible, then only biopsy should be taken rather than the debulking surgery. And after biopsy, chemotherapy should be given. And if there is any residual disease after chemotherapy, it should be resected. But any residual disease after chemotherapy indicates poor prognosis. This is the NCCN guidelines for adult patient, which is generally followed in post-pubertal patients. So according to this, other than stage 1 dysgerminoma and stage 1 grade 1 immature teratoma, all patients should receive chemotherapy 3, 4, or 6 cycles based on the stage and histology. So these are the ongoing trials. This 5131 trial is comparing observation versus chemotherapy in low risk patient, and in intermediate risk patient, cisplatin versus carboplatin. And this 1532 trial is exploring the role of accelerated BEP with standard BEP in poor risk metastatic patients. Standard BEP, which is given 3 weekly, and accelerated BEP is given 2 weekly. Now, one slide about the role of radiotherapy in ovarian tumor. So it is generally not used these days and given only when chemotherapy is contraindicated. So because ovarian tumors have germ cell or epithelial cell tumor, they have tendency to spread to peritoneum. So our target is whole abdomen and pelvis. Anterior-posterior, posterior-anterior field is was used historically to treat these patients. These are the borders. Superior border is 1.5 centimeter above the dome of diaphragm. Inferior border is obturator foramen, and lateral border flash in the air. Kidneys and liver should be shielded. Kidneys should be shielded after 10 gray and liver after 15 gray. And for dysgerminoma, the dose is 25 gray in 12 to 14 fraction, followed by 10 gray. Not given for non-dysgerminoma because they are not radiosensitive. Then this is a technique of delivering whole abdomen radiotherapy, moving strip technique, which was developed in 1963, where the entire abdomen is encompassed in when entire abdomen cannot be encompassed in one portal, and this is then divided into small fields of 2.5 centimeter. At every 2.5 centimeter is a line is drawn, and these small fields are treated alternatively. Kidneys and liver are shielded according as in anterior-posterior open field. Now coming to extragonadal extracranial sites. So in children less than 11 years, they can present at time of birth or during early childhood, and most common site is sacrococcygeal region. Benign teratoma is most common. Malignant yolk sac tumor is rare, and malignant and mediastinal germ cell tumor are very rare in children less than 11 years. But in more than 11 years, mediastinal germ cell tumor are common. So no known environmental factor is available as a causative agent, but it has been seen that there is a high risk of developing these tumors in some syndromes like Klinefelter-Swear and Turner syndrome. This is the COG staging, same principle. Stage 1, 2, 3, 4. Stage 1 is completely resected, 2 is when microscopic disease, 3 is gross disease, and 4 is when distant metastasis. So 2 or 3 slides about sacrococcygeal teratoma. It is most common germ cell tumor in infant and young children. Many times it is detected on antenatal ultrasound. So it is the most frequently recognized fetal neoplasm with an incidence of approximately 1 in 25,000. Has a tendency has a higher tendency for females as compared to males. Although it is mostly benign in young children, the incidence of malignancy in sacrococcygeal teratoma increases with age. So coming to clinical presentation, so generally they present in utero as a mass extending from the caudal end of fetus, which is seen on ultrasound, antenatal ultrasound, or it can be seen as a tumor of infancy. It can be asymptomatic, or if the tumor is large, it can present with sign of obstruction of rectum bladder, or can have weakness, pain, or paralysis. This is Altman classification of sacrococcygeal tumor. Type 1 divided into type 1 to type 4 based on the extent of the tumor, whether it is external or internal. Type 1 when it is completely external, and type 4 when it is internal. Investigations are same. Tumor markers, CT, MRI of primary, CT chest and bone scan if any suspicion of bony involvement. Complete resection is generally undertaken after the birth in majority of the patient, although at some higher specialized center, in utero resection can be possible, but in general in utero intervention are done only to reduce the growth of the tumor and to allow the fetus to recover and continue to grow. So unlike other teratoma, sacrococcygeal teratoma, they do not have a capsule or pseudocapsule. So it is many times it is not possible to achieve a complete resection. And complete resection in these tumor is quite extensive, and it should include removal of coccyx. This grading system has been developed to see the immature component in these tumor, Cruzy grading system. So if tumor is incompletely removed, and if there are immature or malignant component on histopathology, then second look surgery should be conducted for these patients. So post-operative treatment, if mature, immature, look surgery followed by observation. Complete surgery is the key, as chances of recurrence are very high if incomplete surgery. And for malignant tumors, malignant teratoma, chemotherapy has to be given, which leads to a good event-free survival of 85%. Coming to the other malignant extragonadal extracranial germ cell tumor. So as we saw in the COG and MAGIC risk classification also, it was seen that extragonadal site is a poor prognostic factor as compared to the gonadal site. So generally, complete resection is not possible in these tumor, and the prognosis is not good. So chemo has to be given for all patients, and multimodality treatment should be done for all patients. Same chemotherapy. So prognostic factor we already know. Age more than 12 year, extragonadal site, advanced stage, or incomplete resection indicate poor prognosis. So many studies have shown that if the child is more than 12 year and if the tumor location is thoracic, then these tumor have 6 times increased risk of death as compared to smaller children with non-thoracic tumor. Then again, stage, we all know stage is a prognostic factor. Then in one study, it was shown that mediastinal tumor of any stage in older population, they have a survival rate of lower than 60% as compared to the other sites. So these are the various studies. I will not go into detail because of the time constraints. Now coming to the infertility in cancer patient. Because we know there are advances in cancer therapy, and with these advances there is improvement in survival, and there are improved survival will lead to increased chances of long-term toxicity, which will include infertility. And this will have significant emotional impact on younger cancer survivors. So it is very important to discuss these aspects before starting treatment for these patients. So what is the effect of cancer treatment on fertility? First is surgery. removal of bilateral ovaries and uterus for advanced disease will hamper fertility. Then chemotherapy may lead to temporary or permanent amenorrhea. Although menstrual cycle can be resumed later in the life, but resumption of menstrual cycle does not indicate that patient will be having normal pregnancy in her future. Chemotherapy leads to interstitial fibrosis, ovarian vascular damage, and decreased number of complete loss of ovarian follicles. And it has been seen that older women are more vulnerable to develop toxicity, this type of toxicity, as compared to the younger patient, due to reduced ovarian reserve in older girls or older women. So risk of ovarian toxicity depend on the type of chemotherapy drug. These drugs are highly ovarian toxic, like cyclophosphamide, ifosfamide, melphalan, busulfan, procarbazine, dacarbazine. Cisplatin, carboplatin are moderately ovarian toxicity, and then these are the other drugs: methotrexate, 5-FU, vincristine, bleomycin. These have a low risk of ovarian toxicity. Now, coming to effect of radiotherapy on fertility, oocyte is very sensitive to harmful effect of radiation, we all know, and as low as 2 gray of radiation can impair at least 50% of the ovarian reserve. And as in chemotherapy, the effect of radiotherapy also increases along with the age. The sterilizing dose at birth is approximately 20 gray, but at 20 years it is 16 gray, and at 40 years it is reduced up to 14.3 gray. So as the age increases, effect of radiation also increases, and the tolerance of radiation dose also decreases. Coming to the few fertility preservation strategies, these can be divided into fertility preserving surgery, then pharmacological protection during chemotherapy, ovarian transposition, cryopreservation of embryos or oocyte, and cryopreservation of ovarian tissue. So first is fertility preserving surgery. So generally, as discussed, unilateral salpingo-oophorectomy is done for these patients with preservation of uterus and contralateral ovary. Ipsilateral tube, if it is not adherent to the ovary, it can be remained inside, but otherwise it should be removed because of the rich lymphovascular connection with ovary. So other ovary and tube need not to be removed, because it has been also seen that oncological outcome is not compromised by conservative surgery, even if the metastatic disease is present elsewhere in the body. So as in germinoma, where we know that there will be a slight possibility of bilateral tumor in 15 to 20% patient, some surgeon advocate wedge biopsy of the normal appearing contralateral ovary, but this approach is not universally accepted, because we know germ cell tumor are very much sensitive to chemotherapy, and if at all there is a disease, this will be salvaged using chemotherapy, and any unnecessary surgery on normal tissue, even a biopsy, will lead to post-operative adhesion, and it can impair fertility in the future. The next is embryo cryopreservation. This is the only well-established method for fertility preservation. Although oocyte can also be cryopreserved, but embryo cryopreservation is preferred because it has a high survival rate as compared to the oocyte. And it has been seen that live birth rate after embryo cryopreservation, the rate of live birth rate is approximately 45% in women where the cryopreservation was done below 35 years of the age. But this technique has some limitations like time constraints. So before embryo cryopreservation, ovarian hyperstimulation has to be done, and it usually takes 2 weeks But sometimes if the disease is very aggressive, it is not possible to wait for 2 weeks to start the treatment. So time is one limitation. Then absence of partner, like in young children. Then there are some legal and ethical issues in small children, and it is illegal in some countries like Germany, Switzerland. And there are some estrogen sensitive tumors which might get stimulated with a high estrogen level, which is given at the time of ovarian stimulation. Then this oocyte cryopreservation, this is not an established method because it contains water and it is more sensitive to cryoinjury. Then ovarian tissue cryopreservation, which is the only option available in pre-pubertal age group, but it is not an established method, and it is not available. It is available only at few places. But again, this is not an option for ovarian cancer patient or those patients who are at high risk of ovarian cancer, like BRCA1 and 2 carriers. The advantage of this technique is it can be performed at any time, so there will be less delay in initiating the treatment. So this technique is done with the laparoscopic surgery, and with the help of laparoscope, strips of ovarian cortical tissue, which contains a lot of primordial follicles, are removed, and these are freezed using these agents. So once the treatment is completed and patient is disease free, these strips are transplanted. The 3 types of transplantation are available for these strips. First is autologous orthotopic, when the tissue is transplanted to the remaining ovary or pelvic side wall or mesosalpinx. Then heterotropic transplantation, when it is transplanted outside pelvis. Generally, it is transplanted in the subcutaneous tissue of forearm or in the lower abdomen. And the third is non-autologous orthotropic transplantation, when the transplantation is done in identical twin. Basically, this method is not for fertility preservation, but this is a treatment for infertility for this identical twin, where the ovary or ovarian tissue of the other identical twin are transplanted into this patient. So one thing to keep in mind, that after ovarian tissue cryopreservation or transplantation, the life of ovary is less, and it hardly exceeds 10 years. So the transplantation should be done only when patient is ready to conceive, and it generally takes 2 to 5 months after transplantation to start function. Then in radiotherapy, transposition of ovaries can be done, which is known as ovarian suspension or oophoropexy or ovariopexy. The ovaries are transposited outside radiotherapy field. Ovary transposition is done outside the field, and generally it is done on the day of start of radiotherapy or near the day of start of radiotherapy, so that it does not migrate in the pelvis during radiotherapy. The historical approach was to suture these ovaries on the posterior aspect of uterus and use a midline shield, but this is not an good method because there will be some scattered dose to ovaries even when midline shielding is used. So it is a good idea to transpose the ovary above the pelvic brim and as lateral as possible. Then combined approaches can also be used. One ovary can be cryopreserved and other can be transposed. Then we can use external shielding or auto-transplantation of the ovarian tissue can be done. So coming to the side effect of treatment, side effect of chemotherapy, acute side effect can be nausea, vomiting, alopecia or bone marrow depression. And late side effect will be bleomycin-induced pulmonary fibrosis, or there will be cardiovascular risk, which is 2 to 7 times higher with cisplatin. And approximately 30 to 40% of patients who receive high dose of cisplatin, they will develop sensory hearing loss, which is permanent in some patients and bilateral in 20 to 80%. And then hypogonadism and infertility is also the late side effect of chemotherapy. Similarly, for radiotherapy, acute side effect nausea, there can be diarrhea or leukopenia. Major side effects are rare, but they can happen, like intestinal obstruction, peptic ulcer, or hemorrhagic cystitis, gastritis. Then hypogonadism and infertility can also happen after radiotherapy. Then one most important aspect is psychosocial functioning. So these patients, these are small children or adolescents, so they will be having nervousness, anxiety, depression, which is often more during chemotherapy. So counseling should be done for these patients. Then there is a risk of second malignancy after 10 or 20 years. So it has been seen that etoposide can lead to second malignancy like acute leukemias, and there can be radiotherapy induced second cancer like cancer of stomach, bladder, or pancreas. Thank you.